Hi everyone. The primary purpose of this brief tutorial is to show you one way in which you can contribute to the functional behavior assessment process, and that is via conducting a descriptive assessment. But before we begin, I want you to pause this video, and I want you to read the following scenario. If we were to look at this, a lot of us may guess that Marcus in this scenario finds math to be so aversive that he doesn't want to do it. Or some of us may guess that he never wanted recess to end, so he engages in these behaviors to try and get back to it. If we rely on just what we see, then yeah, I would support your assumptions. Perhaps we become too preoccupied with the behavior's physical form, for example, the phrasing in the scenario, refusing to enter the classroom, walking back towards the door. It's reasonable because the physical characteristics of the behavior are what we see. But over-focusing on the behavior's physical characteristics may provide little information about factors in the immediate environment that continue to set the stage for the behavior to happen again. This is why we must also focus on providing information on what happens immediately before and after the behavior occurs to help us provide us with the more complete picture. So, before we start this, if a student were to complete all their work, I would praise. If a student were to stand up and swear constantly, I would reprimand. Both are attention. But when we consider if attention was provided or not, it's important in this case to not pay attention to whether it was good or bad in nature. And you've heard me say this before. But rather if it was provided, withheld, or diverted. What typically happens in the scenario right before the problem behavior in each segment. Also, take a look at what does the teacher do once Marcus engages in the problem behavior. I've bolded to kind of help streamline this process. So I've bolded what happens before the behavior occurs and what happens right after it occurs. And if you read closely, there is a pattern. When transitioning to non-preferred task, or when attention is withheld, Marcus engages in behaviors, which results in attention being provided. So arguably, if we stray from just focusing on the physical characteristics of the behavior to focusing on behavioral functioning, we're at a greater likelihood of responding in more effective ways. So for example, if you take a look at the scenario, the school counselor sitting with Marcus, or in other words, one-on-one support, is meant to suppress his behavior. However, think of this functionally. If he engages in these behaviors to gain access to attention, then a school counselor coming and sitting with him during math is actually increasing the probability that he will engage in these behaviors to gain attention because it continues to be wildly successful. So if attention is the function or the purpose or why the student is engaging in behavior, and we withheld attention for inappropriate behaviors, but provided it in dense and rich amounts for appropriate behaviors, we match function and behavior management is more successful. Here's some important terms. Some of these you've already seen and we've covered. I want you to read each definition, pause the video if you need to. Now, see if you can rewind the video to our scenario and identify the antecedent and consequent events to problem behavior. So, undoubtedly, you each will encounter a student or have already encountered a student who engages in extremely challenging behaviors that disrupt your learning environment. Okay? If the behavior is severe enough or it occurs frequently enough, it has the potential to significantly impact your classroom, which is why it is extremely important, and I want to stress this point, to identify effective and functionally matched interventions to challenging behaviors. We run too many risks to not appropriately intervene on challenging behaviors. But in order to more accurately hypothesize function, we have a process called the functional behavior assessment, where most of this tutorial is going to take place on. So, functional behavior assessment refers to a set of information gathering strategies and instruments that are used to hypothesize function. The primary purpose of an FBA is to use these results to develop an individualized behavioral intervention for more problematic behaviors. The FBA alone, and I said this previously, it's not considered an effective intervention because it's not an intervention. It is the assessment which informs intervention. So, the classroom teacher undoubtedly is an extremely valuable source of information that can increase intervention precision, primarily because you spend the most time during the day with the student, and these teachers are often the front line of support, meaning if an intervention is going to be implemented, then it is most likely going to be implemented in the classroom, right? Therefore, a teacher should be involved in the information gathering process as well as the actual intervention implementation. And it's important that you realize that you are very important conduits of these information, because these are primarily where the natural context where these behaviors are occurring. So most times, a teacher can be involved in the following ways. An interview, they can provide an anecdotal report. But today, I'm going to teach you how to collect ABC data, or antecedent behavior and consequence data, to help you identify environmental events that surround challenging behavior so that you can collect meaningful information that, in the long run, can help you in identifying the best way to offset challenging behaviors or the occurrence of those behaviors. But also, this information might change your practice in more of an immediate sense. For example, you might not provide as much attention in your immediate responses if you can guess that attention is maintaining a behavior that is inappropriate. So, ABC data helps provide a structure for noting behavior and the environmental events that surround it. There are various procedures and data sheets that surround it, but today we're going to focus on a structured format for ABC data collection. The goal with an ABC data sheet is to identify a pattern of antecedents that evoke and consequences that possibly maintain challenging behavior. We can use this information to guide further assessments if needed, or hypothesize function. And once we have function identified, we can use that information to develop our intervention. So the first section of the data sheet are the actual behaviors that the student may typically engage in. These can be customized to match each student. On every occurrence of the inappropriate behavior, you'd want to mark the corresponding letter based on what behavior you just saw. There can be more than one behavior per column. For example, if a student pushed another student while threatening them, then you would mark P and TH in one column, as shown. The next section will be where you record antecedent events, or the event that occurred within 5 seconds before the occurrence of problematic behavior. Simply mark an X in the same column as the behavior it occurred before. For teacher and student attention, you'd want to mark a T or an S instead of the X to signify whether it was the teacher providing attention or whether it was the student providing attention as the antecedent event. So in this example, we see that right before the student began to push and threaten other students, an instruction or a prompt such as get to work or stop engaging in a certain behavior was provided. Next, you would want to record consequent events, or the event that follows the behavior within 5 seconds. These can include reactions from the teachers, peers, etc. And similar to what we did in the antecedent section, you'd indicate from whom the attention was provided by. So in other words, we would mark a T for teacher attention or S for student attention if it was attention being provided as the consequent event. If you take a look at what we just completed here, you would see that the student's behavior that we were collecting data on was given an instruction and prompt as the antecedent event immediately before they begin to push and threaten other students. And immediately after they engage in those behaviors, the teacher redirected the student to another activity. So here's some additional tips when it comes to ABC data collection. So for the first point, ask yourself this question. I'm going to receive $1 million, and I'm only going to receive this $1 million if I see the focal student engaging in the problematic behavior. So to guarantee that I see problem behavior occur so I can get my $1 million, when would I need to observe to collect ABC data? Oftentimes, you might ask a teacher, when is a guaranteed time that the student would engage problematic behavior? And they might say, because it seemingly might feel like the student never stops. From start till stop, that is when the student is engaging in this behavior. When in actuality, we can try and pinpoint a time of day so that way when an observation were to occur, when you were to collect ABC data, it would provide the most meaningful and relevant information. For the next point, it takes time. We are often not able to say with increased confidence that what antecedent and consequent events occur in relation to problem behavior until we have a sufficient number of observations. And lastly, we can only hypothesize function of a behavior. There are more complex assessments that can help confirm function. This class isn't designed to train you on how to complete those procedures, but we refer to those as functional analysis. So on this flowchart here are the characteristic stages of a functional behavior assessment. Today, where the red arrow is, we only focused on direct or descriptive assessments, such as antecedent behavior and consequence recording. As you can see, a comprehensive FBA can be a very complex process, and a teacher's involvement in the process is critical to intervention success. It's important to realize that you, in regard to a school-based environment, are the most informative piece of information, but only so if you're able to provide objective, accurate, and reliable data. So I know some of this stuff can be confusing, and that's all right. If you have any questions or would like to meet and chat, feel free to email me, msamudre@mailbox.sca.edu. But also, we could set up a time to Zoom, either chat by phone, as long as we schedule that ahead of time, and we can go ahead and hopefully answer any questions that you might have up till this point. Thank you for listening to this, and I'll see you for the next lecture.